what are we doing when we design or illustrate? There will be lots of answers to this, from the technical to the analytical, from the objective to the subjective. So what am I getting at? Well, if we are visually communicating something to someone, we are visually connecting with people for them to gain something from the experience. So our audience has to work too. Welcome to Semiosis 101 Season 2's 10th Semiotic video. If you've watched Semiosis 101 videos before, then you already know I am Dave Wood. Season 2's semiotic theme is a semiotic Rosetta Stone, which is a metaphor to the unlocking and designer-centric translation of Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotic theory of semiosis, sign action. Why do you need Semiosis 101? Peirce's writing and terminology is very obtuse. In the next two Season 2 videos, I will be continuing on from last week's discussion on the aesthetic. In this week's video, we discuss the question, why are semiotic signs dependent on interpretation? Notice I say discuss rather than answer the question. Why am I hedging? Well, considering this week we are focusing on the aesthetic, and that is subjective, well, hit subscribe and I will explain. I'm not attempting to obfuscate here, but the subject is wriggly, determinable, quantitative. These provide an unequivocal, definitive answer, but both semiotics and visual communication design outputs deal with people. Let me expand this thesis, as I can already hear some of you saying, hang on there. Both graphic design and illustrations outputs can obviously present facts and reality in denotative ways. Both disciplines can make the most dry of facts pop for the audience while not having to worry about the ephemeral nature of the subjective. It's great, but there's always a but. As soon as a designer or illustrator begins to play with the aesthetic, even with objective data, then the audience is being invited to visually interpret meaning. As soon as the aesthetic is decided upon, the subjective slides in. Okay, I make the subjective sound like a supernatural possession waiting to happen. Now my tongue is firmly planted in my cheek here, but I quickly want to reinforce the idea that the aesthetic, however you currently think of it, provokes response. Let us play a thought exercise here so I can get quickly to my point. The same data is shared on the same page in two different ways. Neither version changes the data. One version of the data presents it in a typeset column in 10-point Times New Roman with no paragraphing or other visual hierarchy to emphasize any part of the data over other parts. Another version puts exactly the same data into an infographic, utilizing color, hierarchy, illustration, different type sizes, etc. to make the same data accessible. Data has not changed. Do I have to ask which version of the same data will be more accessible to an audience? Okay, now we're on the same page. Let's continue. Version 2 of the data in this thought exercise is clearly more desirable to read over version 1. Aesthetic decisions have rendered the data more accessible. With each aesthetic decision taken, the data is not changed, but how the audience perceives the data is manipulated. In version 1, there are no indicators to hierarchy in the data. In version 2, hierarchy is the key to understanding the data. This begins the subjective response in the audience to what parts of the data they will perceive first. Does the audience scan headings first or jump straight to the visual display of the findings, or do they jump to the conclusion first? This is quickly sliding into a deconstruction of an academic research poster, so let me quickly change tack. I said in my welcome at the beginning of this video that we will discuss and not answer why are semiotic signs dependent on interpretation. In past Semiosis 101 Season 2 videos, I have spent time exploring Peirce's semiotic determination flow from both a macro level and a micro level of analogues to the creative process. Check out Omnibus 2.2. From a macro analog level, I used the example of a client creative audience triadic flow. If the client wanted the data to be disseminated in an unadulterated way, then the creative would do just that. Meanwhile, what about the needs of the audience? If that audience is a small academic niche of experts, then fine, but Yes, there is always a but. Before the comments start filling up with comments that I am constructing a straw man argument, let us consider human nature. We are visual animals. We are hardwired that way. Many of us are visual learners who take information in much better by appealing to our visual nature. Visual communication design is what creatives do. Audience do not know something until they know something. That should not be a controversial statement. If a client could disseminate directly and effectively to their audience, then we would not exist. But we do because the client cannot do it effectively. How can the audience know what the client wants them to know? Well, the creative's aesthetic choices can effectively facilitate this, or not. Semiosis, sign action, can enhance the success. The aesthetic grabs attention, or not. We have already spent time exploring this in previous videos. Hall, in his book, discusses visual noise that permeates modern societies, visually overloading the audience. In Semiosis 101, through Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory, we have examined ways for creatives to hack through that noise straight to their target audience. When I discuss the aesthetic, I'm not doing so in the classic sense of a creative inspired to provide a visual statement of artistic creation. I am firmly framing this within Richard Schusterman's pragmatic framework, where the aesthetic attracts attention and holds it. In this way, the aesthetic comprises of visual triggers to attract and retain attention. The aesthetic as we frame it in Semiosis 101 is crafted with the audience in mind and not the client creative. By framing the aesthetic pragmatically, its appeal is emergent in the audience. Whatever content or data is conveyed through the aesthetic is visually communicated in ways that subconsciously appeals to the attendant audience. Schusterman was influenced in his view on the aesthetic by John Dewey, a fellow founder of pragmatism with C.S. Peirce. Dewey was also interested in education, where learning can emerge through actions, through doing. This constructivist pedagogy from pragmatism underpins my HE teaching and Semiosis 101 itself. So, back to our audience. What are these visual triggers embedded in the chosen aesthetic then? Let's return to Peirce's semiotic termination flow, as the answer is in the levels of crafting effective sign action. Here we will also see the answer to this week's question emerge in a pure constructivist way too. Peirce's sign action flows from what he describes as the object through its representamen, resulting in an interpretant that puts the object in the mind. This is an ongoing process of sign action where the new object then suggests further meaning, and around the determination flow we subconsciously continue. Those terms of Peirce's are loaded with problems for creatives and everyone else who is not a Peircean scholar. So in Semiosis 101 we use the design-centric analog terms concept, representation, interpretation. This is the micro-analog level I mentioned at the beginning of this video. If we equate concept with the client brief, representation with the designer illustrator, then that means the audience are the ones involved with interpretation. But what will they interpret? Will it be the intended meaning set out by the client's brief? That scenario only leaves one who can facilitate a smooth determination flow from concept to successful interpretation. Yes, I am talking about you creatives. If you are not mindful of the decisions you make in your aesthetic choices, you can fail the audience, fail the client. That is a scary thought and extra pressure on a role already pressured with many subjective variables. So how can a creative enhance the visual communication chances of eliciting the successful responses in the intended audience? We've spent time over the last few months discussing design as an experience rather than an event. If pragmatically the aesthetic attracts attention, then the creative can utilize, during their ideation phase, iconic representation as basic visual communication building blocks to attract the attention of the target audience. To end this 10th season 2 video, it is important to remind ourselves that any semiotic sign will not begin to work until it is perceived by the audience. Firstly, this strongly suggests that semiotic signs remain dormant and powerless to begin communicating until the audience interprets something as something. Secondly, these semiotic signs are encoded into the aesthetic to trigger perception at an iconic representation level. This is nothing more than visual suggestions or similarities to qualities that are recognizable by the audience to things that are familiar to them. If these qualities can be visually linked to the concept, the aesthetic will have more chance of grabbing and holding their attention long enough for the desired meaning to be interpreted. Come back next week to Semiosis 101 to understand how the aesthetic can be semiotically encoded. I am Dave Wood, a design educator and researcher, a published design author, and I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. The guy behind the theory, Charles Sanders Peirce, was a philosopher, a mathematician, and a theorist. But he was not a creative. Each week on this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I will post at least one 10-minute explainer video on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. Each video will feature a take-home piece of applicable semiotic theory, and they do interconnect to build up your understanding of semiosis. Each free Semiosis 101 10-minute video will use design-centric terms instead of theoretical language. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I have a link in the description to my Scout Scott website. If you're interested in reading my Semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can visit my academia.edu link in the description. Any other books on Peircean semiotics or design I have mentioned in the videos are also listed in the description. Check them out too. On the Semiosis 101 Substack semiotic resource, I have support materials for both free and paid subscribers. There are full annotated reading lists, video transcripts, 5-minute reads, plus other goodies and exclusive Semiosis 101 merchandise. The Substack link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Check out the other Semiosis 101 videos, like and share them with your friends, and hit the bell and subscribe buttons to be notified when next week's free Semiosis 101 video is published. You can also follow Semiosis 101 on the socials for updates. It is Semiosis 101 on Instagram and Twitter. See you all again next week for more Semiosis 101 to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.